In today's episode of the Pathfind Presents podcast, I'm here with Paige LaNasa, and she's hailing over as the head of marketing at Seaplane IO. And today we want to really deep dive into Seaplane. It's basically a platform for building and scaling your applications, and we really want to figure out what that means, who's benefiting most, and also how Paige is thinking about growth in this very interesting industry. So, Paige, welcome to the show.
I'm so happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe give us a 360 overview. What is Seaplane all about?
Yeah, so Seaplane is a cloud computing startup that makes cloud usage a little bit easier. Using the cloud for a modern application stack is incredibly complicated. You've got your big public clouds like AWS, GCP, and normally when you want to deploy an app onto one of those big public clouds, you have to pick sort of the region and the resources you think you're going to need for your user base. And the more regions you want to ship to, the more complicated that becomes. So Seaplane kind of removes all of the guesswork and really streamlines that kind of infrastructure management for you. You just deploy once with us and you're everywhere. We shift your workloads where your users are based on your actual traffic patterns. And if you go on our website, you'll see there are a ton of globes and they're all like rotating very slickly because as the sun moves across the earth, your applications will similarly move. So as Europe is going to sleep, we'll scale down your resources for you. As the America wakes up, we'll scale up the resources over there. It's basically removing all of the guesswork and complications that kind of are inherent with using the cloud.
Very cool. That was a very accessible explanation of, I think, what you guys are doing. Super, super interesting. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's very close to assume that it's straight up targeted at developers. But maybe tell us a little bit more about in which sort of context, which types of companies do benefit typically the most? Is that people that are just building up their products, or is that folks even that have they migrate into your setups? Maybe tell us a little bit about the typical company that would benefit the most from Seaplane.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously, the global component can kind of put off some of the smaller companies that we've talked to or worked with as design partners, because it's like, oh, I'm not this massive multinational conglomerate. But really, Seaplane is great for basically any company that wants to run in more than one region or wants some of the availability and redundancy of running in more than one region or on more than one cloud. So a big segment that we work with is startups that are starting to scale. So like right after Series B, if you want to move into a new market, normally there's a ton of kind of invisible work that your engineering team has to take on to support these new countries and these new data regulations. So we kind of remove all that. So if you suddenly have a bunch of users that are cropping up in Japan, we can just spin up resources to do that for you automatically. So it's a great choice, especially for companies that are just starting to grow or are just considering expanding, more internationally or even just from one coast to the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And what would you say? Do people sort of, is it more like from the roots up, the developers discover the product and tinker, or is it more like a product that the head of the CTO, for example, would be bringing into a team?
Yeah, so we're definitely more on the product-led kind of growth and sales movement right now. A lot of the times people who come to us hear about us just through word of mouth, and we do a ton of user research. So we're constantly having really interesting conversations with data scientists and CTOs at startups and developers and DevOps people. So a lot of the times it's kind of a friend of a friend situation where somebody heard that somebody talked to us or somebody was intrigued by something they saw on social media or our blog. So it is very grassroots in that way.
And what role do you think the website plays? You alluded to it with actually have some, as I would agree with you, very slick animations on the page to basically visualize what you guys are doing. What role do you think the website plays in the journey of developer getting to know about Seaplane?
Yeah, it's obviously incredibly core to what we do. Developers are a great audience to work with because you can't pull your usual marketing tricks. They don't necessarily want, that kind of traditional outbound. They don't necessarily want to be bombarded with emails. I mean, who does? So having like a website that provides, especially developers with all of the information they need to make their own decision without the pressure of, sitting in a room with a sales guy is really important and is really great. So the website is very much how we kind of tell our story without necessarily being in the room, so developers can kind of pace out their own kind of customer journey.
I see. And typically when we have marketers on the show, they already have, they always find something on the website that they want to improve or develop and work towards. Is there already something in mind that do you think, hey, maybe a strength of the website, and on the other side, sort of, where do you see room for improvement?
Yeah, so I think one of our, big strengths on the website is our blog. We are, have just started pushing out some really good stuff. So I think it's really cool that we have that. It's very accessible and easy to use. You can also filter it by category, which we knew was going to be important because, again, engineers aren't necessarily going to consume the same content as like a product person or a product marketer. In terms of things we want to improve, we're working on our documentation. We're currently, pre-wide launch right now. So we really want to, when we launch the documentation, we want it to be super intuitive and super easy to use. Docs are so critical to the developer experience that we want to make sure they integrate really well and they kind of match the look and feel of the website, and that ultimately they're useful, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah, very cool. And I'm curious about your experience as a marketer in general, right? Because you've been in other different marketing roles prior. What have you learned over the years? What makes sort of for a good tool to figure out why people would or would not convert on the website? Is there any approaches, methods, technologies that you learned over the years that you think actually help to make a successful website?
Yeah, definitely. So I've always worked in the kind of B2B technology space. So obviously your mileage may vary depending on what industry you're in and if you're more consumer focused. But most of the time I've learned that data is really, really critical to everything that you're doing. I have a background in behavioral science, so I've always sort of been working with lots and lots of spreadsheets and trying to figure out why someone makes the decision that they make. So being able to very closely track how people interact with your website is very key. You won't always be able to get into the minds of somebody clicking around on your website, but the more you look at, traffic patterns, where people are falling off, where people are clicking, where people are scrolling and reading, the more you can kind of put together a narrative. So being able to get that data to tell that consumer story is easily the most important thing that I've learned. As much as I love to rely on that more brand qualitative psychology, like, oh, why would somebody do X or Y? Ultimately, data is the best way to know.
Yeah, makes complete sense. I appreciate you giving us that insight. I want to switch gears a little bit and learn a little bit more about yourself as a person and as a marketer. The first thing I want to ask is, there's so much content out there for marketers, right? And now you switched into a role of, into an industry where basically your persona is a developer. Like, maybe tell me a little bit about that phase of going into a new industry and, figuring out how an industry works. Like, what does a marketer do? Where do you go? Where do you read? How do you do that?
Yeah. So I think going into Seaplane, cloud computing is one of those things that's incredibly complicated. Like, even for people who spend their entire careers and get graduate degrees on this topic, still have tons to learn. So as a marketer with a background in mostly like design and brand, going in, I think it's kind of a fool's errand to try to become as much of an expert as your audience. I think it's really important to talk to the experts in your company and be really willing to listen to their experiences. As the marketer, you definitely have a level of expertise over your discipline that no one else in your company is going to have. But ultimately, everyone around you is your best possible resource. So coming in, I very much wanted to take a long time. I had this whole listening campaign where I just talked to everybody at Seaplane and learned more about their role and how it all fit together. And anytime I had questions about, engineering, I would go to the engineers and ask, can you please explain to me what exactly an API call is, or how exactly load balancing works? So having that kind of listening mindset really served me well, and kind of just that level of acceptance of, I am never going to be an engineer. and that's okay. I can still make cool stuff for engineers, and I can still collaborate with engineers. And there's nothing worse to an engineer than a non-technical person spewing jargon. So just accepting my strengths and kind of leaning into the strengths of others has been a real key piece of kind of integrating into this new industry.
Very nice. As we slowly approaching the end of the interview, I have some rapid fire questions for you to wrap it up. Are you ready for those?
All right, sounds good.
What's the last book you read?
Ooh, that would be the library book. It's about like this wild journey through the Los Angeles Public Library, and I cannot recommend it enough.
Interesting. What's one single thing that your company is focused on the most at the moment?
Simplifying cloud complexity.
If there would be no boundaries in technology, right? Everything is possible. What would be the one thing you would fix for your role today?
Ooh. It's very dystopian, but I would absolutely love some kind of eye tracking on our website just to get a better sense of what people are actually reading for sure, so I can write better stuff.
What's the last thing that kept you awake at night about the company?
Ooh, anytime I write a social post or a blog that gets reviewed by an engineer, I always worry that they didn't catch one of my technical mistakes and that we're going to get a bunch of angry replies explaining that we messed everything up and that we don't know anything about anything. So always worried about the technical details.
Gotcha. That makes a whole lot of sense. And it's actually a very interesting skill to build up as a marketer. So kudos to you. Then the very last question would be, if we do a little bit of time travel, we go back to the days of University of Texas at Dallas, right? Now you're heading out of your formal education into the world of at first research and then marketing as well. What would be the one advice you would give yourself for your journey?
Oh, find mentors, find people who you really admire and want to emulate, and just ask them to mentor you. I wish I had, as a younger person, more chutzpah to ask more questions and make more connections with older marketers and more senior people. I think it's one of the best things that you can do is kind of learn from the people who have made the mistakes so you don't need to make them yourself.
Good. Paige, I really appreciate you took the time with us today to be a guest on Platform Presents. I want to give you the very last word. If somebody would be forgetting all that we discussed about Seaplane today, what's the one thing that they should remember?
If you want to ship your apps once and globally, come to Seaplane. We'll manage all the infrastructure for you. Just focus on developing your apps.
Thanks a lot for being a guest on Platform Presents.
Thank you.